What is the exposure triangle? Hi, my name is Peter Gatt, and I'm from the School of Photography, and people talk about the exposure triangle all the time. But what exactly is it? The exposure triangle is composed of three settings that we can change on our camera that will impact our exposure, making it lighter, darker, or just right. The three controls we have are the shutter speed, the aperture, and the ISO. Now the shutter controls how long we allow the light to come in through the lens to strike the film or the digital sensor. Typically we have a range of about 8 thousandths of a second. Some cameras only go as fast as 4 thousandths of a second, right down to 30 seconds. Now if you see the number 30 in your viewfinder and nothing else, that means it's a 30th of a second. If you see 30 and the inches symbol or quotation sign, that means 30 full seconds. And most cameras can go from 8 thousandths right down to 30 seconds. Next we have the aperture. Now the aperture controls the volume of light, how much light is coming through the lens to strike the film or digital sensor. The full range of f-stops can go from f1 right down to f45. Now no lens can do all of those apertures, but most typical lenses can go from f1.4, f2.8, right down to f22. Most professional lenses, zoom lenses, like the 24-70 f2.8, goes from f2.8 right down to f22. Then we have the ISO. ISO can range from 100 and go as fast as 6400 or even higher on certain newer models. Now with your setting, a shutter speed slow like a 30th or a quarter of a second, it's going to allow more light but also allow possible subject movement or motion blur. While a faster shutter speed will stop the action, freeze the moment in time, like 1/500th or 1,000th of a second. A bigger aperture like f2.8 allows more light to come in, but has what we call shallower depth of field, while a smaller aperture like f16 allows less light to come through the lens, but has greater depth of field, more things that appear to be in focus. A lower ISO like 100 or 200, even 400 ISO is cleaner, sharper, has less noise than a higher ISO like 1600 or 3200. It'll be more sensitive to light, but it does have more noise. Noise is a spottiness that you see in the image, and it can take away the sharpness and clarity of your photograph. Now there are some cameras that can go as low as 50 ISO, but most cameras typically go from 100 ISO right down to 3200 or 6400 ISO. Some of the newer cameras can go much higher, but it does increase the noise. Now when we're photographing certain events, we may require certain settings. And remember, it's the exposure triangle, so all three things have to come together. On this photograph of the bald eagle, we're looking at 2 thousandths of a second to stop the motion, stop the splash of the water, but I needed an aperture of 5.6 and the ISO was 3200. On this waterfall, I don't need a high ISO, but I do need a very slow shutter speed. On this one, it was 30 seconds long. Aperture is f22 with just 100 ISO. Now with this one, of course, I would be using a tripod. Portrait. On this one here, I don't need a high ISO. Relatively fast shutter speed because I am hand holding a big 400mm lens, and the aperture is f5.6. Now if I want a greater depth of field, like in the landscape photograph here, shutter speed is 1/25th of a second, f16 with the ISO of just 50 on this particular camera. So this one here is going to have a smaller aperture to allow more depth of field from the foreground to the background, everything in focus. Now you don't need a tripod, but I am using a tripod on this photograph to help keep the camera straight so that I have a nice clean image. On this photograph here of the owl, ISO is not too high. It's only 400 ISO. aperture at 5.6 for nice shallow depth of field, but the shutter speed is 500th of a second because I am, again, hand holding the camera and I want to keep it as sharp as possible. Now in this photograph here, it's overcast, cloudy. Of course, it is raining, and I'm using a fast shutter speed to try and freeze the water droplets as well as freeze the bird, and I am using 2,000 of a second. Because of the rain, I need a very high ISO, 3200, and the aperture is 5.6 for a nice shallow depth of field. Unfortunately, with the 3200 ISO, it's quite noisy. We see all the spottiness in the background, and it takes away from the sharpness. Now, with today's newer technology, with Photoshop and Lightroom, we can use the digital noise and denoise and remove this noise. And this will help clean up the image and make it sharper and looking like we use 100 or 200 ISO. If you're interested in learning more about photography and would like to attend a 6-week program, please visit our website. You can do it in person in the Greater Toronto Area or in a virtual classroom anywhere in the world. Just visit schoolofphotography.ca.